Okay, so to resume with Rudolf Steiner here, I've got a series of paintings illustrating this lecture, which is fascinating. I think we're up to lecture number 8 here. This is called The Dentures, and it was painted by Odd Nedrum in 1983, and you'll see why I have it here in a minute with the reference to the changing of the teeth at the age of 7, when a child turns 7. A dramatic transformation takes place, not only in his body, but in his relationship to his parents. Something transforms completely, like a snake shedding its skin. Ad Nedrum was heavily influenced also by Rudolf Steiner, as was Joseph Beuys. And for a while there, after World War II, Nedrum was present. He was in Dusseldorf, but he felt that the postmodern way that they were going about art, especially Beuys, and Beuys was also very heavily influenced by Steiner, he felt that it was just the wrong way to go. And so he left, went back to Oslo, and worked out his cosmology. He's one of my absolute favorite painters. I think possibly the best painter since World War II. Just fantastic art, and it's all spiritual and mythological, full of spiritual, mythological ideas. And so in a way, he's postmodern in his own way. Only a postmodern artist would paint a set of dentures as a still life. I mean, that in itself is postmodern, regardless of whether he's dismissed by the Academy simply for going back to the style of the old masters, which he perfected. Rembrandt, Titian. He's trying to paint like those guys, and I think he does a very good job of it. So in this lecture is really interesting. It's about karma in relationship to health and illness and our bodies, and how it affects our bodies. Actually, how we look, every aspect of our bodies. And he says specifically that childhood illnesses. Now he says, with regard to the theory of heredity, at the time everything was heredity. Every characteristic, every gene has been simply inherited from one's parents. But he says this is true only for the physical body. And it's true only up until the age of 7, which for you astrologers is known as Saturn square Saturn. But the individual also brings down his own soul spiritual karma from other worlds. And at that point, the body no longer belongs to the parents. The body is a sort, he says, it's a sort of model that is given to one's soul to work with. And either you overcome the model or the model overcomes you. And the more like your parents you end up being, the more closer you are to the hereditary body that you had for the first 7 years of your life. Now, the child is very, very different after the teeth fall away, at the age of 7, 8 years old, and the etheric body is freed up at that point, and at that point, most of its energy had been being used to form and shape the physical body, but now there's energy available to develop the intellect. And so this is why in Steiner's theory of education, he thinks children, and I think he's wrong here about this, but children should not be they shouldn't learn how to read until the age of 7. I think that's a little late. I think I learned at about 4 years old how to read. I had an instant attraction to books. So he says, okay, so then one's individual karma then takes over that body. But childhood illnesses are actually the effects of our behavior from previous lives. He gives a couple of really interesting examples, some of them kind of funny, where in a way this goes back a bit. He's retrieving the discredited science of physiognomy, where the body looks a certain way. You should be able to tell by the way a person looks whether he's a criminal or an honest man. And I believe that there is some truth to that. I'm sorry. The physical body does reflect the character of the indwelling individual. A lot of creeps look like creeps and are creeps. But some aren't. You get the Ted Bundys who are totally normal looking. So that depends. But he says what's interesting about people's looks, whether they are attractive or unattractive, has to do with whether they appreciated painting in a previous life. If they appreciated painting, they're going to be attractive individuals. If they didn't, they're going to have what he calls an unsympathetic expression, which I take as a polite way of just saying not very attractive. So, and then he gives this other funny example about, because he says the whole point he makes here is how much it matters, how much attention we pay to the world. If we walk through it blithe and indifferent to it, it's going to have karmic consequences, not good ones either. The world wants us to pay attention to it. He says, for instance, there are people who never look up at the stars and don't know how to identify Leo or Aries or Taurus. And then he says those people are born in the next life with a body that is limp and flabby. Limp, lacking in energy, and lethargic, because the individual never paid attention to the stars. Rilke knows this in his poetry. The world is there. It wants us to notice it. It wants us to pay attention to it, and it wants to get into us. Now, I had childhood asthma as a big problem, and I was wondering as I was reading this chapter if he would mention that. And indeed he did. And he says that people who have asthma trouble when they're children are people who did not like music in a previous life. Now I know who my previous life was. My great-grandfather. He was a surgeon, a medical man, a military man, probably not a man who cared much for art or music or even literature. As bright as he was about the physical body, so that makes sense to me. He probably didn't like music. So here again, he gets into this idea about friends, and so let's take a look at some of Odd Nedrum's interesting. I think some of his later ones, like this one, get better and better. His art, as it goes along, gets more and more astral, more and more Steinerian, let's say, and less purely mythological. I love this one here, where he's got souls floating in limbo, and he's painted himself down here, getting ready to reincarnate. And here, possibly, this one's kind of hard to, I guess you have to slide it. I think it's called String. Maybe this is a group of souls who are getting ready to incarnate, because Steiner says that we incarnate in groups. Now he says it's this thing about friends. Sometimes you'll have two kids, let's say two boys, and this was definitely the case in my life, who are friends early on in life. And they're friends all the way down to, say, around the age of 20, which was indeed the age at which I parted with two friends in particular that I grew up with and was very close to. And he says, so you part, and you can never get that relationship back again in life, ever. Even if you re-encounter the person later in life, you won't get it back. He says it's because you were friends in a previous life, you met each other at the age of 20, and were friends through the rest of your life. So you can either have close ties with each other early on in life or late in life, and that will affect the karma of who you meet, because we're all incarnating in groups and tribes, and I think that Odd Nedrum's painting here captures it very well, this idea of this, and it's very eerie too, the way he illuminates the astral plane. I don't think anyone's ever painted the astral plane as well as Odd Nedrum. Not even Alex Gray, whose art I think is just total New Age kitsch and full of cliches. So that's that lecture from Steiner, which I find to be quite good and illuminating about childhood illnesses and so forth. All right, well, this is a short one, but a good one. So we'll leave it there.